Hi, everyone. Welcome back to natekokernot. This is Miracle Readiness. I am going to take a break today from doing the ACIM text because we are in between chapters 4 and chapters 5, and because I really wanted to talk about astrology. So I put on my astrology hat. This is my astrology hat. This month is a seismic shift of a month in astrology, according to all of the astrologers that I listen to. Some of them, just to name some names, who are specifically or especially excited about July, are Pam Gregory, who's an older lady. I think she's Irish, who is seeing a massive paradigm shift in these transits that I'm going to talk about later. Rick Levine is an older guy from England, I think, who's also really fascinated by this. But they're all talking about it. They've been talking about July of 2026 since 2024 at least, and some of them even longer. Some of them have been looking ahead to it for their whole lifetimes, wondering just what this is going to look like. To give you another name, there's this guy, a French astrologer who's passed. His name was Arnold Barbault. I believe it was Arnold. I know it was Barbault, who he was predicted the pandemic, the COVID pandemic in 2020. And he is looking at this set of transits that I'm going to be talking about as the most benefic transit pattern in our lifetimes, but I think he even went further than that and saying, like, in modern times, it's the most benefic, most helpful set of transits. So things in July are going to be crazy, I think. There's going to be a lot of shifts and probably a lot of secrets coming out because Pluto's involved. Uh, and possibly revolution, hopefully a peaceful revolution, a revolution of the mind and the soul, not of the fists and the guns and the weapons. Uh, but in general, I think most of the astrologers are leaning towards a paradigm shift and technological advances that are kind of mind-blowing. So I'm going to get into these transits, but I sort of wanted to start by introducing the planets involved. So we've got Pluto. He's been sitting in Aquarius since November of 2024. He's finally landed in Aquarius. Pluto's a very, very slow-moving planet, and I think he's got a bit of an oblong um, orbit around the sun. So that means he'll spend a lot of time in some signs and then less time in others. And I think he's going to be in Aquarius. I'm not sure how long, but quite a while now that he's there. And Pluto, from what I understand, has a lot to do with death, has a lot to do with truth, has a lot to do with rebirth, and secrets as well, like the hidden stuff, the unconscious, I think is very tied in with Pluto. He's playing a major role in this. He's in Aquarius. Two signs away from Aquarius, we have Aries, where Neptune has been parked since February of this month. I don't know if you remember, but on February 20th, Neptune and Saturn met at the 0 degrees of Aries, which was a huge deal to the astrologers. One, because that's considered the 0 point in the zodiac. 0 of Aries is the very beginning of the zodiac, which is the equinox, the spring equinox, is Aries, the sun's day at 0 Aries. Uh, these two planets have been conjunct many times. It's usually seismic shift kind of stuff, big energy, but it never happened at 0 point of Aries in anybody's memory. And Saturn moved on a little faster. It's now at the middle of Aries, around 15 degrees. Neptune is at 4 degrees of Aries. And Neptune, it's easier to explain Neptune with contrast to Saturn, that most people, conventional non-Course in Miracles students perhaps, would say Saturn is reality and Neptune is illusion and fantasy and dreaminess. Neptune is definitely tied into our dreams a lot. But of course, guys like Rick Levine, who seems to agree with me that this world isn't real and agrees with Jesus that this world isn't real, is saying, well, maybe it's Neptune's turn to be reality. And Saturn's going to take the back seat. uh, Saturn's a planet that's more like the harsh reality, like you got to slow down, you got to think things through, you got to consider things carefully. Neptune's all dreams and illusion in the, conventional sense, but it's also definitely, I think, the most spiritually aligned planet in the zodiac. So that's at 4 degrees of Aries, which is 2 signs off from Aquarius. And then we skip another sign and go to Gemini, where we find Uranus right now, nearing 4 degrees. Uranus is a somewhat faster moving planet. Neptune is really slow. I think it's spent 8, 9 years in Pisces, if I'm not mistaken. Uranus, I think, spent 7 years in Taurus before it got to Gemini. It has been there most recently. It was in a little bit in Gemini last year, and then it retrograded back into Taurus and then moved forward again. And I think it's been there since April, I want to say. And Uranus is the planet of shocking electricity, new developments, electric new developments, and often associated with revolution. And uh, Uranus in Gemini has had a history of being in time with major wars that we've had. Uranus was in Gemini during World War II. It was actually kind of towards the end of World War II that it was started in Gemini. And it was there for the Civil War, and I believe it was there for the American Revolution too. So this goes along with the whole um, what I've talked about with Neil Howe and the fourth turning, the winter time that we're in right now. Uh, I've even heard it come out of certain astrologers' mouth that the fourth turning in Uranus and Gemini seem to be a joint thing. So now I've got 2 roads to history as cyclical. I don't just have Neil Howe's work and William Strauss's work, but I also have all these astrologers who are telling me, yeah, of course, history is cyclical. The fourth planet involved is Jupiter. We have to skip 2 more signs from Gemini past Cancer into Leo. And that's where Jupiter's parked itself since last week. It spent the last year in Cancer, which is a sign that it is exalted in. It is its home sign. Exalted means it's especially impressive in its what it does. And um, Jupiter expands and, yeah, accentuates everything it comes into transit with. It's considered one of the 2 most benefic planets in general. I think if you have a day chart, then Jupiter is your benefic. And if you have a night chart, meaning you were born at night when the sun was down, then Venus is your benefic. Benef I was born in the morning, or late morning, so Jupiter is my benefic. Cancer also happens to be my ascendant sign, so it was parked in my sign, my first sign for the last year. Wasn't great though. And a lot of people commented that even though it was in its home sign where it's exalted and it should be bringing lots of joy and kind of expansion for people, A lot of people reported it didn't do that so much for them, even if they were cancers like me. And a lot of people are saying it's actually really happier in Leo. Leo's more the kind of sign that Jupiter gets along with. And Leo is a fire sign too, just like Aries is. And I think Jupiter tends to have a fiery kind of a element. Anyways, um, those are the four planets. And just one last thing about Jupiter is it's the fastest moving planet of these four. It is tends to stay in one sign for a year. So it only takes 12 years for it to go around the zodiac, whereas Pluto is the other extreme. I think it can take 270 years for Pluto to do around, uh, approximately. So that's something. Uh, I also want to mention that these are all, with the exception of Jupiter, very slow moving transits, which means one, there's two things I need to mention. One is that they're all outer planets, and outer planets, astrologers have found, have they do affect our individual lives greatly. Uh, I had something happen during the Neptune Saturn conjunction. But the other thing that happened was the first shots in this war with Iran and the United States and Israel were shot like right that day or the next day. And so they're very, very slow, which means that the effects of them can be felt for a great deal of time. They have this thing in astrology called orbs, where they typically look 3 degrees before and after the exact transit are when you could feel its effects. And I'm going to mention later, but I'll just say it now. Some of these planets are going to be lingering close to these exact sextiles for the next few years, because they move so slow and because sometimes the faster one goes into retrograde, which lets the slower one catch up a little, and then it heads on. And so this pattern that we're entering into right now, it's going to be kind of constant for the next, I think, until 2028 at least, uh, where they're all going to be roughly close to each other, and they're going to be exact transits between different ones of them, at least Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus for the next 3 years. Jupiter's going to pass through and move on to do other things. Other things I wanted to mention before I got into looking at the charts is that they are all beneficial transits. They're trines and sextiles, and those are generally considered easier transits, which, from what I've learned about astrology, you learn a lot more from the hard aspects, the hard transits like 90-degree transits or 45-degree transits. Uh, but they're not easy. They're not felt as nice. But these are all, with the exception of Jupiter and Pluto being in opposition, and you'll see the pictures soon. Oppositions are not considered happy, friendly, easy transits. But all the other transits involved are sextiles, which are 60 degrees, and trines, which are 120 degrees. And those are considered to be more benefic. The other thing to mention is that they are all in air and fire signs. Okay, so we've got Pluto and Uranus both in air signs, Aquarius and Gemini, and we've got Neptune and Jupiter in fire signs. So expect lots of fire, lots of combustible stuff happening. There's already been, I know it's true every summer, but a ton of wildfires lately in both Europe and the Western United States, and I'm sure other places that I haven't heard of. And I would expect a lot more of that for these next few years, and also fiery things happening between human beings. because air, you know, air is what fire needs to thrive. And so having all these outer planets in all those elements together, it's fiery. Okay. I think that's all for an introduction. So I'm going to start with I'm going to lead you through the exact aspects as they come in the calendar. The first exact aspect is Uranus meeting Neptune in a sextile on July 15th. Here's a picture of that. And you can see that Uranus is in Gemini and Neptune is in Aries. 3 days later, on July 18th, we have Uranus and Pluto trining. That's 120 degrees, and you can see Pluto's in Aquarius. Uranus is in Gemini again. Uranus and Pluto coming together, like I mentioned, the energy of Uranus was electric shock and revolution, and Pluto is hidden secrets, oftentimes, but it can also be death in the let's say in the human sense, because we're of course in Miracles students, so we don't actually believe in death, but it could be world leaders die. It could be famous people die, sudden shifts, big deal events like that. Now, I think it's on the 19th of July that the moon enters into this picture. And you can see that we've had these two little mini trines in the last two pictures that connects those first 3 points, and then Jupiter coming into it, coming close. So it's what's called Barbault's basket, is the two big triangles that are crossing in those images. But for, the moon moves faster than anything else in the zodiac. It's only in a sign for like roughly 2.5 days. But it's going to come around to 4 degrees of Libra, which is another air sign, and create the 5th point. And you can see that here, that now it looks like something else entirely. The 6th point, if there were going to be a 6th point, would be in Sagittarius, which is the last fire sign in the zodiac. I happen to have a midpoint of Neptune, the spiritual planet, and Vertex, which isn't really a planet, it's more a point, and it has something to do with the moon, the little nodes of the moon. I'm not exactly sure what it is. Vertex is a point that generally lives in the Scorpio to Capricorn part of the chart. And then there's an anti-vertex that lives in the other across from that. I guess from Taurus to Gemini, Cancer. Anyways, my vertex is in Sagittarius. My Neptune is in Sagittarius, both early points of Sagittarius, and I happen to have the midpoint is pretty much right in the middle of this mix. So we get if you have something significant at 4 degrees of Sagittarius, you've got a Star David essentially happening for a day. And when the moon is coming around the Libra. And that's going to be roughly, I think, around the 19th of July that the moon is there at 4 degrees of Libra. All of this is happening at 4 degrees. That's why they're considered really, really closely conjunct. If they're all within, there's 60 minutes in a degree in the zodiac. And they're going to be at times all within 10 or 15 minutes. So a quarter of a degree, that's very, very exact. But I'm going through the list of the exact transits as they happen. So on July 20th, Jupiter is going to exactly trine Neptune in Aries. So Leo and Aries, you see that here. And then also on the 20th, Jupiter and Pluto are going to come later in the day into exact transit. So I think perhaps the apex or the climax of all this could be around the 20th or the 21st, third week of July, beginning of the third week of July, roughly. And then we've got this one final thing happening at the end of the month that some of the astrologers are just shitting themselves about how crazy it is. The full moon of July 29th is happening with the sun almost exactly conjunct Jupiter in Leo. It has moved on to about 6 degrees of Leo, but it's still close enough orb to be significant. So we've got the sun and Jupiter exactly conjunct in Leo, opposing Pluto and the moon in Aquarius. And yeah, there's so much happening on that day. There's some other. So meanwhile, with the full moon happening, there's also a pretty much exact square between Mars in Aquarius and Venus in Scorpio. Mars and Venus are kind of the lovers of the zodiac, as in Mars is the male energy and Venus is the feminine energy. Mars is also considered a malefic planet and Venus a benefic planet. So squares are hard aspects and they can be felt as conflict. Could be a lot of relationship issues if coming up if you're in a partnership. And also Chiron is in the mix there. It is squaring Jupiter and the Sun and Pluto and the Moon. So it's creating its own triangle. You can see that there in the red. It's not near exact, but it's still, Chiron is like the wounded healer. What I understand about Chiron is when you come out of a Chiron kind of transit or a ingress in your sign, which I've had in Cancer for far too long. It's been there for like 7 years, and it finally moved into Taurus just a couple weeks ago. And you take what you learned in all of the kind of negative feeling experiences you had at that time, and you learn from it and heal through it. And then you are more adept at helping others heal as a result. So Chiron was this really sympathetic figure in the mythology. I'm not going to go into the story of it because I don't know it that well. But he is going to retrograde back into my sign Aries. That's where my sun is for another few months in September. And then he's going to clear out of there for forever. I'm not going to see him again, which I'm looking forward to. But to get at this whole thing, the big picture of it all, I I think like the big astrologers do that this is a paradigm shift moment. I know that AI is the technology that's probably involved, but I've also heard like Federico Fagan, who's the Italian guy who's got a theory of consciousness that's more aligned with what's it called? The idea that everything is conscious, all the plants, all the trees, all the rocks, everything in the world is conscious, which I don't have much trouble with, even though I don't think it's exactly true. It's symbolically, it's true enough. And he's been looking at AI as possibly the end of the scientific dogma period of our lives, because we have replaced, in the last century or two, we have replaced religion with science as the most significant truth-seeking activity that we can partake in. But a lot of scientists have gotten very dogmatic about it and said you can't go out, you can't color outside the lines. And it's like, well, what if the answers are outside of the lines? What do we do then? So I'm tying all of this to him, to Donald Hoffman, who's, I know, in the last stages of figuring out the math and making sure all the math works out with his theory of consciousness. Could be even released in July for all I know. And I don't know if people will be watching, but if it's scientifically proven with mathematics involved, because that's the new understanding of most scientists who are worth their stripes, let's say. Uh, if the math doesn't check out, then you can just throw out the theory because it's not real. That's replaced our eyes and our ears as, the final say is mathematics now. If the math is symmetrical, the scientific theory is good. And, I've told you all before when I've talked about Donald Hoffman, he's been working with two mathematicians on this project, and they're just having their minds blown by how beautiful and symmetrical everything is fitting together with his new theory of, what do we call that? I don't know what to call his new theory. I haven't thought about it for a while, but it's basically taking experiences as the fundamental assumption instead of space and time as a fundamental assumption. And just saying, yes, we can all acknowledge that we have experiences. And then he started from there and created this very interesting theory. And all the math is so far working out. So the discrepancy between the standard model of quantum physics and general relativity is getting figured out with the math. It's now symmetrical, it works. And there is the same discrepancy between special relativity and the standard model for quantum physics. That's being worked out now. So with Donald Hoffman's experiments. So I'm very hopeful that there will be some big news about consciousness, that consciousness itself is fundamental, and the world we see is a construction of our consciousness, which is fragmented only to the sense that we think we believe it's fragmented. And once we accept that it's not actually fragmented, which is what we've been talking about with A Course in Miracles, the world is going to start to shift towards really focusing on loving one another, I think. And Uranus and Pluto, no, I'm sorry, Neptune and Pluto, I believe, they've been involved in other major quantum physics things, like when was it? Um, Niels Bohr, I think was his name, who was in disagreement with Einstein about some things like quantum entanglement. But he was more the spiritual quantum physicist than any of them back in the 20s and 30s. And he started the Copenhagen group in around a Neptune Pluto transit. And other things like telescopes and microscopes and stuff were all invented, I think, during, if I'm not mistaken, I heard somebody, Pam Gregory, just talking about it yesterday. I'm going to share one of her videos with you because she knows what she's talking about, and I am just an armchair astrologer at this point. I'd like to study and get more actually attuned with it intuitively, but at this point, it's really, I'm just like a viewer of these things, and then I share it with you because it fascinates me. Anyways, all of those major advancements in science and stuff, they've not all of them, but a lot of them have come during major Neptune Pluto transits. So that's where I think this is all heading. And of course, you can imagine I'm very excited. It could be a great awakening. Uh, just don't expect it to happen all at once. Remember that these are very slow moving planets. And like I said, the transits are going to happen again and again. I was looking it up. And Neptune and Pluto are going to be in sextile a dozen more times in the next 6 years. So between now and 2032, they're going to actually sextile exactly twice a year, pretty much every year. Okay. Uranus and Neptune are they're in sextile on July. Can't remember which day in July. I think I missed that one. But they're going to do it two more times in 27. And Uranus and Pluto will trine four more times before the summer of 2028. So, there's a bunch of dates on your calendar that you could mark for all of these exact transits to watch out for. Not as in there's terrible calamity, although there might be, but more as like significant dates in the progress of this. And so it seems like most of the fireworks are over by 2028. Um, and then maybe it's like us figuring out what it's like to be in this new world with a new idea of mind over matter and what we do with that. Uh, what technologies come out of that. Donald Hoffman's talked about some very interesting technologies because now we don't need to travel through time and space. We could assume there are other places to, or other ways to get yourself someplace vastly far away. So that's all. I just wanted to share all of that exciting news with you. And I also wanted to ask that if you guys notice, people who are following this channel, if you notice some really seismic shifts, either in your own thinking, in your own mind, or in relationship, or just in terms of your day-to-day life, please share. I'd love to hear them, and I'll share stuff that comes up for me. So, yeah, apart from all of this Barbo's basket stuff that we're talking about here on this channel today, there's just a lot of other excitement too in the month of July and August, and frankly, the rest of the year. Most astrologers are saying stuff is going to just be happening a lot faster for the next 2 or 3 years. All right, so that's it for today. Thank you for bearing with me as I do my little amateur astrology gig here on the side. And I will see you soon, coming back into chapter 5 of the text for Course in Miracles. I wish you all a day filled with miracles and blessings, and I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.